Chapter 19. I went to my first lecture with a sense of excitement. The theme was a surefire guarantee of audience interest, and the rest was up to me. If only I were a foot taller and 100 pounds heavier, I could simply stand before them with a sign across my chest, stating I know all about them, and they'd be as awed as though I were the original boogeyman, somehow reformed and domesticated. I'd no more have to speak than Paul Robeson had to act, they'd simply thrill at the sight of me. And it went well enough. They made it a success through their own enthusiasm, and the barrage of questions afterwards left no doubts in my mind. It was only after the meeting was breaking up that there came the developments which even my volatile suspicions hadn't allowed me to foresee. I was exchanging greetings with the audience when she appeared, the kind of woman who glows as though consciously acting a symbolic role of life and feminine fertility. Her problem, she said, had to do with certain aspects of our ideology. It's rather involved, really, she said with concern, and while I shouldn't care to take up your time, I have a feeling that you— Oh, not at all, I said, guiding her away from the others to stand near a partly uncoiled fire hose hanging beside the entrance. Not at all. But, brother, she said, it's really so late and you must be tired. My problem could wait until some other time. I'm not that tired, I said. And if there's something bothering you, it's my duty to do what I can to clear it up. But it's quite late, she said. Perhaps some evening when you're not busy you'll drop in to see us. Then we could talk at greater length. Unless, of course. Unless, she smiled, I can induce you to stop by this evening. I might add that I serve a fair cup of coffee. Then I'm at your service, I said, pushing open the door. Her apartment was located in one of the better sections of the city, and I must have revealed my surprise upon entering the spacious living room. You can see, brother, the glow she gave the word was disturbing. It is really the spiritual values of brotherhood that interest me. Through no effort of my own, I have economic security and leisure, but what is that, really, when so much is wrong with the world? I mean when there is no spiritual or emotional security, and no justice? She was slipping out of her coat now, looking earnestly into my face, and I thought, is she a Salvationist, a Puritan with reverse English, remembering Brother Jack's private description of wealthy members who, he said, sought political salvation by contributing financially to the Brotherhood. She was going a little fast for me and I looked at her gravely. I can see that you've thought deeply about this thing, I said. I've tried, she said, and it's most perplexing, but make yourself comfortable while I put away my things. She was a small, delicately plump woman with raven hair in which a thin streak of white had begun almost imperceptibly to show, and when she reappeared in the rich red of a hostess gown she was so striking that I had to avert my somewhat startled eyes. What a beautiful room you have here, I said, looking across the rich cherry glow of furniture to see a life-sized painting of a nude, a pink Renoir. Other canvases were hung here and there, and the spacious walls seemed to flash alive with warm, pure color. What does one say to all this? I thought, looking at an abstract fish of polished brass mounted on a piece of ebony. I'm glad you find it pleasant, brother, she said. We like it ourselves, though I must say that Hubert finds so little time to enjoy it. He's much too busy. Hubert? I said. My husband. Unfortunately he had to leave. He would have loved to have met you, but then he's always dashing off. Business, you know. I suppose it's unavoidable, I said with sudden discomfort. Yes, it is, she said. But we're going to discuss brotherhood and ideology, aren't we? And there was something about her voice and her smile that gave me a sense of both comfort and excitement. It was not merely the background of wealth and gracious living, to which I was alien, but simply the being there with her and the sensed possibility of a heightened communication, as though the discordantly invisible and the conspicuously enigmatic were reaching a delicately balanced harmony. She's rich but human, I thought, watching the smooth play of her relaxed hands. There are so many aspects to the movement, I said. Just where shall we start? Perhaps it's something that I'm unable to handle. Oh, "It's nothing that profound," she said. "I'm sure you'll straighten out my little ideological twists and turns. But sit here on the sofa, brother, it's more comfortable." I sat, seeing her go toward a door, the train of her gown trailing sensuously over the oriental carpet. Then she turned and smiled. "Perhaps you'd prefer wine or milk instead of coffee?" "Wine, thank you," I said, finding the idea of milk strangely repulsive. This isn't at all what I expected, I thought. She returned with a tray holding 2 glasses and a decanter, placing them before us on a low cocktail table, and I could hear the wine trickle musically into the glasses, one of which she placed in front of me. "Here's to the movement," she said, raising her glass with smiling eyes. "To the movement," I said. "And to brotherhood." "And to brotherhood." "This is very nice," I said, seeing her nearly closed eyes, her chin tilting upward, toward me. "But just what phase of our ideology should we discuss?" "All of it," she said. "I wish to embrace the whole of it. Life is so terribly empty and disorganized without it. I sincerely believe that only brotherhood offers any hope of making life worth living again. Oh, I know that it's too vast a philosophy to grasp immediately, as it were, still, it's so vital and alive that one gets the feeling that one should at least make the try. Don't you agree?" "Well, yes," I said. "It's the most meaningful thing that I know." "Oh, I'm so pleased to have you agree with me. I suppose that's why I always thrill to hear you speak, somehow you convey the great throbbing vitality of the movement. It's really amazing. You give me such a feeling of security, although," she interrupted herself with a mysterious smile, "I must confess that you also make me afraid." "Afraid? You can't mean that," I said. "Really," she repeated, as I laughed. "It's so powerful, so primitive." I felt some of the air escape from the room, leaving it unnaturally quiet. "You don't mean primitive?" I said. "Yes, primitive. No one has told you, brother, that at times you have tom-toms beating in your voice?" "My God," I laughed, "I thought that was the beat of profound ideas." "Of course, you're correct," she said. "I don't mean really primitive. I suppose I mean forceful, powerful. It takes hold of one's emotions as well as one's intellect. Call it what you will, it has so much naked power that it goes straight through one." I trembled just to think of such vitality. I looked at her, so close now that I could see a single jet black strand of out-of-place hair. "Yes," I said, "the emotion is there, but it's actually our scientific approach that releases it. As Brother Jack says, we're nothing if not organizers. And the emotion isn't merely released, it's guided, channelized, that is the real source of our effectiveness. After all, this very good wine can please emotion, but I doubt seriously that it can organize anything." She leaned gracefully forward, her arm along the back of the sofa, saying, "Yes, and you do both in your speeches. One just has to respond, even when one isn't too clear as to your meaning. Only I do know what you're saying, and that's even more inspiring. Actually, you know, I'm as much affected by the audience as it is by me. Its response helps me do my best. And there's another important aspect," she said, "one which concerns me greatly. It provides women the full opportunity for self-expression, which is so very important, brother. It's as though every day were leap year, which is as it should be. Women should be absolutely as free as men. And if I were really free," I thought, lifting my glass, "I'd get the hell out of here. I thought you were exceptionally good tonight. It's time the woman had a champion in the movement. Until tonight I'd always heard you on minority problems. This is a new assignment," I said. "But from now on one of our main concerns is to be the woman question." "That's wonderful, and it's about time. Something has to give women an opportunity to come to close grips with life. Please go on, tell me your ideas," she said, pressing forward, her hand light upon my arm. And I went on talking, relieved to talk, carried away by my own enthusiasm and by the warmth of the wine. And it was only when I turned to ask a question of her that I realized that she was leaning only a nose tip away, her eyes upon my face. "Go on," Please go on, I heard. You make it sound so clear, please. I saw the rapid, moth-wing fluttering of her lids become the softness of her lips as we were drawn together. There was not an idea or concept in it but sheer warmth. Then the bell was ringing and I shook it off and got to my feet, hearing it ring again as she arose with me, the red robe falling in heavy folds upon the carpet, and she saying, "You make it all so wonderfully alive," as the bell sounded again. And I was trying to move, to get out of the apartment, looking for my hat and filling with anger, thinking, is she crazy? Doesn't she hear? As she stood before me in bewilderment, as though I were acting irrationally. And now taking my arm with sudden energy, saying, "This way, in here," almost pulling me along as the bell rang again, through a door down a short hall, a satiny bedroom, in which she stood appraising me with a smile, saying, "This is mine," as I looked at her in outrageous disbelief. "Yours, yours? But what about that bell?" "Never mind," she cooed, looking into my eyes. "But be reasonable," I said, pushing her aside. "What about that door?" "Oh, of course, you mean the telephone, don't you, darling? But your old man, your husband? In Chicago, but he might not." "No, no, darling, he won't, but he might." "But, brother, darling, I talked with him, I know." "You what? What kind of game is this?" "Oh, you poor darling. It isn't a game, really. You have no cause to worry, we're free. He's in Chicago, seeking his lost youth, no doubt," she said, bursting into laughter of self-surprise. "He's not at all interested in uplifting things, freedom and necessity, woman's rights and all that. You know, the sickness of our class, brother, darling." I took a step across the room. There was another door to my left through which I saw the gleam of chromium and tile. "Brotherhood, darling," she said, gripping my biceps with her little hands. "Teach me, talk to me. Teach me the beautiful ideology of brotherhood." And I wanted both to smash her and to stay with her and knew that I should do neither. Was she trying to ruin me, or was this a trap set by some secret enemy of the movement waiting outside the door with cameras and wrecking bars? "You should answer the phone," I said with forced calm, trying to release my hands without touching her, "for if I touched her, and you'll continue?" she said. I nodded, seeing her turn without a word and go toward a vanity with a large oval mirror, taking up an ivory telephone. And in the mirrored instant I saw myself standing between her eager form and a huge white bed, myself caught in a guilty stance, my face taut, tie dangling, and behind the bed another mirror which now like a surge of the sea tossed our images back and forth, furiously multiplying the time and the place and the circumstance. My vision seemed to pulse alternately clear and vague, driven by a furious bellows, as her lips said soundlessly, "I'm sorry," and then impatiently into the telephone, "Yes, this is she," and then to me again, smiling as she covered the mouthpiece with her hand, "It's only my sister, it'll only take a second." And my mind whirled with forgotten stories of male servants summoned to wash the mistress's back, chauffeurs sharing the master's wives, Pullman porters invited into the drawing room of rich wives headed for Reno, thinking, but this is the movement, the brotherhood. And now I saw her smile, saying, "Yes, Gwen, dear. Yes," as one free hand went up as though to smooth her hair and in one swift motion the red robe swept aside like a veil, and I went breathless, at the petite and generously curved nude, framed delicate and firm in the glass. It was like a dream interval and in an instant it swung back and I saw only her mysteriously smiling eyes above the rich red robe. I was heading for the door, torn between anger and a fierce excitement, hearing the phone click down as I started past and feeling her swirl against me, and I was lost, for the conflict between the ideological and the biological, duty and desire, had become too subtly confused. I went to her, thinking, let them break down the door, whosoever will, let them come. I didn't know whether I was awake or dreaming. It was dead quiet, yet I was certain that there had been a noise and that it had come from across the room as she beside me made a soft sighing sound. It was strange. My mind revolved. I was chased out of a Chinquapin woods by a bull. I ran up a hill, the whole hill heaved. I heard the sound and looked up to see the man looking straight at me from where he stood in the dim light of the hall, looking in with neither interest nor surprise. His face expressionless, his eyes staring. There was the sound of even breathing. Then I heard her stir beside me. "Oh, hello, dear," she said, her voice sounding far away. "Back so soon?" "Yes," he said. "Wake me early, I have a lot to do." "I'll remember, dear," she said sleepily. "Have a good night's rest." "Night, and you too," he said with a short dry laugh. The door closed. I lay there in the dark for a while, breathing rapidly. It was strange. I reached out and touched her. There was no answer. I leaned over her, feeling her breath breezing warm and pure against my face. I wanted to linger there, experiencing the sensation of something precious perilously attained too late and now to be lost forever, a poignancy. But it was as though she'd never been awake, and if she should awaken now, she'd scream, shriek. I slid hurriedly from the bed, keeping my eye on that part of the darkness from where the light had come as I tried to find my clothes. I blundered around, finding a chair, an empty chair. Where were my clothes? What a fool! Why had I gotten myself into such a situation? I felt my way naked through darkness, found the chair with my clothes, dressed hurriedly and slipped out, halting only at the door to look back through the dim light from the hall. She slept without sigh or smile, a beautiful dreamer, one ivory arm flung above her jet-black head. My heart pounded as I closed the door and went down the hall, expecting the men, crowds, to halt me. Then I was taking the stairs. The building was quiet. In the lobby the doorman dozed, his starched bib buckling beneath his chin with his breathing, his white head bare. I reached the street limp with perspiration, still unsure whether I had seen the man or had dreamed him. Could I have seen him without his seeing me? Or again, had he seen me and been silent out of sophistication, decadence, over-civilization? I hurried down the street, my anxiety growing with each step. Why hadn't he said something, recognized me, cursed me, attacked me? Or at least been outraged with her? And what if it were a test to discover how I would react to such pressure? It was, after all, a point upon which our enemies would attack us violently. I walked in a sweat of agony. Why did they have to mix their women into everything? Between us and everything we wanted to change in the world they placed a woman, socially, politically, economically. Why, God damn it, why did they insist upon confusing the class struggle with the ass struggle, debasing both us and them, all human motives? All the next day I was in a state of exhaustion, waiting tensely for the plan to be revealed. Now I was certain that the man had been in the doorway, a man with a briefcase who had looked in and given no definite sign that he had seen me. A man who had spoken like an indifferent husband, but who yet seemed to recall to me some important member of the Brotherhood, someone so familiar that my failure to identify him was driving me almost to distraction. My work lay untouched before me. Each ring of the telephone filled me with dread. I toyed with Tarp's leg chain. If they don't call by 4 o'clock, I'm saved, I told myself. But still no sign, not even a call to a meeting. Finally I rang her number, hearing her voice, delighted, gay and discreet, but no mention of the night or the man. And hearing her so composed and gay I was too embarrassed to bring it up. Perhaps this was the sophisticated and civilized way? Perhaps he was there and they had an understanding, a woman with full rights. Would I return for further discussion, she wanted to know. Yes, of course, I said. Oh, brother, she said. I hung up with a mixture of relief and anxiety, unable to shrug off the notion that I had been tested and had failed. I went through the next week puzzling over it, and even more confused because I knew nothing definite of where I stood. I tried to detect any changes in my relations with Brother Jack and the others, but they gave no sign. And even if they had, I wouldn't have known its definite meaning, for it might have had to do with the charges. I was caught between guilt and innocence, so that now they seemed one and the same. My nerves were in a state of constant tension, my face took on a stiff, non-committal expression, beginning to look like Brother Jack's and the other leaders. Then I relaxed a bit, work had to be done and I would play the waiting game. And despite my guilt and uncertainty, I learned to forget that I was a lone guilty black brother and to go striding confidently into a room full of whites. It was chin up, a not too wide stretched smile, the outthrust hand for the firm warm handshake. And with it just the proper mixture of arrogance and down-to-earth humility to satisfy all. I threw myself into the lectures, defending, asserting the rights of women, and though the girls continued to buzz around, I was careful to keep the biological and ideological carefully apart, which wasn't always easy, for it was as though many of the sisters were agreed among themselves, and assumed that I accepted it, that the ideological was merely a superfluous veil for the real concerns of life. I found that most downtown audiences seemed to expect some unnamed something whenever I appeared. I could sense it the moment I stood before them, and it had nothing to do with anything I might say. For I had merely to appear before them, and from the moment they turned their eyes upon me they seemed to undergo a strange unburdening, not of laughter, nor of tears, nor of any stable, unmixed emotion. I didn't get it. And my guilt was aroused. Once in the middle of a passage I looked into the sea of faces and thought, do they know? Is that it? And almost ruined my lecture. But of one thing I was certain, it was not the same attitude they held for certain other black brothers who entertained them with stories so often that they laughed even before these fellows opened their mouths. No, it was something else. A form of expectancy, a mood of waiting, a hoping for something like justification, as though they expected me to be more than just another speaker, or an entertainer. Something seemed to occur that was hidden from my own consciousness. I acted out a pantomime more eloquent than my most expressive words. I was a partner to it but could no more fathom it than I could the mystery of the man in the doorway. Perhaps, I told myself, it's in your voice, after all. In your voice and in their desire to see in you a living proof of their belief in brotherhood, and to ease my mind I stopped thinking about it. Then one night when I had fallen asleep while making notes for a new series of lectures, the phone summoned me to an emergency meeting at headquarters, and I left the house with feelings of dread. This is it, I thought, either the charges or the woman. To be tripped up by a woman. What would I say to them, that she was irresistible and I human? What had that to do with responsibility, with building brotherhood? It was all I could do to make myself go, and I arrived late. The room was sweltering, 3 small fans stirred the heavy air, and the brothers sat in their shirt sleeves around a scarred table upon which a pitcher of iced water glistened with beads of moisture. Brothers, I'm sorry I'm late, I apologized. There were some important last-minute details concerning tomorrow's lecture that kept me. Then you might have saved yourself the trouble and the committee this lost time, Brother Jack said. I don't understand you, I said, suddenly feverish. He means that you are no longer to concern yourself with the woman question. That's ended, Brother Talbot said, and I braced myself for the attack, but before I could respond Brother Jack fired a startling question at me. What has become of Brother Todd Clifton? Brother Clifton, why, I haven't seen him in weeks. I've been too busy downtown here. What's happened? He has disappeared, Brother Jack said, disappeared. So don't waste time with superfluous questions. You weren't sent for that. But how long has this been known? Brother Jack struck the table. All we know is that he's gone. Let's get on with our business. You, brother, are to return to Harlem immediately. We're facing a crisis there, since Brother Todd Clifton has not only disappeared but failed in his assignment. On the other hand, Ras the Exhorter and his gang of racist gangsters are taking advantage of this and are increasing their agitation. You are to get back there and take measures to regain our strength in the community. You'll be given the forces you need and you'll report to us for a strategy meeting about which you'll be notified tomorrow. And please, he emphasized with his gavel, be on time. I was so relieved that none of my own problems were discussed that I didn't linger to ask if the police had been consulted about the disappearance. Something was wrong with the whole deal, for Clifton was too responsible and had too much to gain simply to have disappeared. Did it have any connection with Ras the Exhorter? But that seemed unlikely. Harlem was one of our strongest districts, and just a month ago when I was shifted, Ras would have been laughed off the street had he tried to attack us. If only I hadn't been so careful not to offend the committee, I would have kept in closer contact with Clifton and the whole Harlem membership. Now it was as though I had been suddenly awakened from a deep sleep. Chapter 20. I had been away long enough for the streets to seem strange. The uptown rhythms were slower and yet were somehow faster. A different tension was in the hot night air. I made my way through the summer crowds, not to the district but to Barrel House's Jolly Dollar, a dark hole of a bar and grill on Upper 8th Avenue, where one of my best contacts, Brother Machio, could usually be found about this time, having his evening's beer. Looking through the window, I could see men in working clothes and a few rummy women leaning at the bar, and down the aisle between the bar and counter were a couple of men in black and blue checked sports shirts eating barbecue. A cluster of men and women hovered near the jukebox at the rear. But when I went in, Brother Machio wasn't among them, and I pushed to the bar, deciding to wait over a beer. "Good evening, brothers," I said, finding myself beside two men whom I had seen around before, only to have them look at me oddly, the eyebrows of the tall one raising at a drunken angle as he looked at the other. "Shit," the tall man said. "You said it, man, he a relative of yourn?" "Shit, he goddamn sure ain't no kin of mine." I turned and looked at them, the room suddenly cloudy. "He must be drunk," the second man said. "Maybe he thinks he's kin to you. Then his whiskey's telling him a damn lie. I wouldn't be his kin even if I was. Hey, Barrel House." I moved away, down the bar, looking at them out of a feeling of suspense. They didn't sound drunk and I had said nothing to offend, and I was certain that they knew who I was. What was it? The brotherhood greeting was as familiar as "give me some skin or peace, it's wonderful." I saw Barrel House rolling down from the other end of the bar, his white apron indented by the tension of its cord so that he looked like that kind of metal beer barrel which has a groove around its middle, and seeing me now, he began to smile. "Well, I'll be damned if it ain't the good brother," he said, stretching out his hand. "Brother, where you been keeping yourself?" "I've been working downtown," I said, feeling a surge of gratitude. "Fine, fine," Barrel House said. "Business good?" "I'd rather not discuss it, brother. Business is bad. Very bad. I'm sorry to hear it." "You'd better give me a beer," I said, "after you've served these gentlemen." I watched them in the mirror. "Sure thing," Barrel House said, reaching for a glass and drawing a beer. "What you putting down, a layman?" he said to the tall man. "Look here, Barrel, we wanted to ask you one question," the tall one said. "We just wanted to know if you could tell us just whose brother this here cat's supposed to be? He come in here just now calling everybody brother." "He's my brother," Barrel said, holding the foaming glass between his long fingers. "Anything wrong with that?" "Look, fellow," I said down the bar, "that's our way of speaking. I meant no harm in calling you brother. I'm sorry you misunderstood me." "Brother, here's your beer," Barrel House said. "So he's your brother, eh, Barrel?" Barrel's eyes narrowed as he pressed his huge chest across the bar, looking suddenly sad. "You enjoying yourself, McAdams?" he said gloomily. "You like your beer?" "Sho," McAdams said. "It cold enough?" "Sho, but Barrel, you like the groovy music on the Duke?" Barrel House said. "Hell, yes, and you like our good, clean, sociable atmosphere?" "Sho, but that ain't what I'm talking about," the man said. "Yeah, but that's what I'm talking about," Barrel House said mournfully. "And if you like it, and don't start trying to bug my other customers. This here man's done more for the community than you'll ever do." "What community?" McAdams said, cutting his eyes around toward me. "I hear he got the white fever and left." "You liable to hear anything," Barrel House said. "There's some paper back there in the gents' room." You ought to wipe out your ears. Never mind my ears. Aw, come on, Mac, his friend said. Forget it. Ain't the man done apologized? I said never mind my ears, McAdams said. You just tell your brother he ought to be careful bout who he claims as kinfolks. Some of us don't think so much of his kind of politics. I looked from one to the other. I considered myself beyond the stage of street fighting, and one of the worst things I could do upon returning to the community was to engage in a brawl. I looked at McAdams and was glad when the other man pushed him down the bar. That McAdams thinks he's right, Barrelhouse said. He's the kind can't nobody please. Be frank though, there's lots feel like that now. I shook my head in bafflement. I'd never met that kind of antagonism before. What's happened to Brother Machio? I said. I don't know, brother. He don't come in so regular these days. Things are kinda changing up here. Ain't much money floating around. Times are hard everywhere. But what's been going on up here, Beryl? I said. Oh, you know how it is, brother, things are tight and lots of folks who got jobs through you people have lost them. You know how it goes. You mean people in our organization? Quite a few of them are. Fellows like Brother Machio. But why? They were doing all right. Sure they was, as long as you people was fighting for 'em. But the minute you all stopped, they started throwing folks out on the street. I looked at him, big and sincere before me. It was unbelievable that the Brotherhood had stopped its work, and yet he wasn't lying. Give me another beer, I said. Then someone called him from the back, and he drew the beer and left. I drank it slowly, hoping Brother Machio would appear before I had finished. When he didn't, I waved to Barrelhouse and left for the district. Perhaps Brother Tarp could explain, or at least tell me something about Clifton. I walked through the dark block over to 7th and started down. Things were beginning to look serious. Along the way I saw not a single sign of Brotherhood activity. In a hot side street I came upon a couple striking matches along the curb, kneeling as though looking for a lost coin, the matches flaring dimly in their faces. Then I found myself in a strangely familiar block and broke out in a sweat. I had walked almost to Mary's door, and turned now and hurried away. Barrelhouse had prepared me for the darkened windows of the district, but not, when I let myself in, to call in vain through the dark to Brother Tarp. I went to the room where he slept, but he was not there. Then I went through the dark hall to my old office and threw myself into my desk chair, exhausted. Everything seemed to be slipping away from me and I could find no quick absorbing action that would get it under control. I tried to think of whom among the district committee I might call for information concerning Clifton, but here again I was balked. For if I selected one who believed that I had requested to be transferred because I hated my own people, it would only complicate matters. No doubt there would be some who'd resent my return, so it was best to confront them all at once without giving any one of them the opportunity to organize any sentiment against me. It was best that I talk with Brother Tarp, whom I trusted. When he came in he could give me an idea of the state of affairs, and perhaps tell me what had actually happened to Clifton. But Brother Tarp didn't arrive. I went out and got a container of coffee and returned to spend the night poring over the district's records. When he hadn't returned by 3 a.m. I went to his room and took a look around. It was empty, even the bed was gone. I'm all alone, I thought. A lot has occurred about which I wasn't told, something that had not only stifled the members' interest but which, according to the records, had sent them away in droves. Barrelhouse had said that the organization had quit fighting, and that was the only explanation I could find for Brother Tarp's leaving. Unless, of course, he'd had disagreements with Clifton or some of the other leaders. And now returning to my desk I noticed his gift of Douglas portrait was gone. I felt in my pocket for the leg chain, at least I hadn't forgotten to take that along. I pushed the records aside, they told me nothing of why things were as they were. Picking up the telephone I called Clifton's number, hearing it ring on and on. Finally I gave it up and went to sleep in my chair. Everything had to wait until the strategy meeting. Returning to the district was like returning to a city of the dead. Somewhat to my surprise, there were a good number of members in the hall when I awoke, and having no directives from the committee on how to proceed, I organized them into teams to search for Brother Clifton. Not one could give me any definite information. Brother Clifton had appeared at the district as usual up to the time of his disappearance. There had been no quarrels with committee members, and he was as popular as ever. Nor had there been any clashes with Ras the Exhorter, although in the past week he had been increasingly active. As for the loss of membership and influence, it was a result of a new program which had called for the shelving of our old techniques of agitation. There had been, to my surprise, a switch in emphasis from local issues to those more national and international in scope, and it was felt that for the moment the interests of Harlem were not of first importance. I didn't know what to make of it, since there had been no such change of program downtown. Clifton was forgotten. Everything which I was to do now seemed to depend upon getting an explanation from the committee, and I waited with growing agitation to be called to the strategy meeting. Such meetings were usually held around 1 o'clock and we were notified well ahead. But by 11:30 I had received no word and I became worried. By 12 an uneasy sense of isolation took hold of me. Something was cooking, but what, how, why? Finally I phoned headquarters, but could reach none of the leaders. What is this? I wondered, then I called the leaders of other districts with the same results. And now I was certain that the meeting was being held. But why without me? Had they investigated Restrom's charges and decided they were true? It seemed that the membership had fallen off after I had gone downtown. Or was it the woman? Whatever it was, now was not the time to leave me out of a meeting. Things were too urgent in the district. I hurried down to headquarters. When I arrived, the meeting was in session, just as I expected, and word had been left that it was not to be disturbed by anyone. It was obvious that they hadn't forgotten to notify me. I left the building in a rage. Very well, I thought, when they do decide to call me they'll have to find me. I should never have been shifted in the first place, and now that I was sent back to clean up the mess they should aid me as quickly as possible. I would do no more running downtown, nor would I accept any program that they sent up without consulting the Harlem Committee. Then I decided, of all things, to shop for a pair of new shoes, and walked over to Fifth Avenue. It was hot, the walks still filled with noontime crowds moving with reluctance back to their jobs. I moved along close to the curb to avoid the bumping and agitated changes of pace, the chattering women in summer dresses, finally entering the leather-smelling, air-cooled interior of the shoe store with a sense of relief. My feet felt light in the new summer shoes as I went back into the blazing heat, and I recalled the old boyhood pleasure of discarding winter shoes for sneakers and the neighborhood foot races that always followed, that light-footed, speedy, floating sensation. Well, I thought, you've run your last foot race and you'd better get back to the district in case you're called. I hurry now, my feet feeling trim and light as I moved through the oncoming rush of sun-beaten faces. To avoid the crowd on 42nd Street I turned off at 43rd, and it was here that things began to boil. A small fruit wagon with an array of bright peaches and pears stood near the curb, and the vendor, a florid man with bulbous nose and bright black Italian eyes, looked at me knowingly from beneath his huge white and orange umbrella, then over toward a crowd that had formed alongside the building across the street. What's wrong with him? I thought. Then I was across the street and passing the group standing with their backs to me. A clipped, insinuating voice spelled words whose meaning I couldn't catch, and I was about to pass on when I saw the boy. He was a slender brown fellow whom I recognized immediately as a close friend of Clifton's, and who now was looking intently across the tops of cars to where down the block near the post office on the other side a tall policeman was approaching. Perhaps he'll know something, I thought, as he looked around to see me and stopped in confusion. "Hello, there," I began, and when he turned toward the crowd and whistled I didn't know whether he was telling me to do the same or signaling to someone else. I swung around, seeing him step to where a large carton sat beside the building and sling its canvas straps to his shoulder as once more he looked toward the policeman, ignoring me. Puzzled, I moved into the crowd and pressed to the front where at my feet I saw a square piece of cardboard upon which something was moving with furious action. It was some kind of toy and I glanced at the crowd's fascinated eyes and down again, seeing it clearly this time. I'd seen nothing like it before. A grinning doll of orange and black tissue paper with thin flat cardboard discs forming its head and feet and which some mysterious mechanism was causing to move up and down in a loose-jointed, shoulder-shaking, infuriatingly sensuous motion, a dance that was completely detached from the black, mask-like face. It's no jumping jack, but what, I thought, seeing the doll throwing itself about with the fierce defiance of someone performing a degrading act in public, dancing as though it received a perverse pleasure from its motions. And beneath the chuckles of the crowd I could hear the swishing of its ruffled paper, while the same out of the corner of the mouth voice continued to spiel, "Shake it up. Shake it up. He's Sambo, the dancing doll, ladies and gentlemen. Shake him, stretch him by the neck and set him down, he'll do the rest. Yes. He'll make you laugh, he'll make you sigh, see ya. He'll make you want to dance, and dance. Here you are, ladies and gentlemen, Sambo, the dancing doll. Buy one for your baby. Take him to your girlfriend and she'll love you, love you. He'll keep you entertained. He'll make you weep sweet tears from laughing. Shake him, you cannot break him for he's Sambo, the dancing, Sambo, the prancing, Sambo, the entrancing, Sambo boogie woogie paper doll. And all for 25 cents, the quarter part of $1. Ladies and gentlemen, he'll bring you joy. Step up and meet him, Sambo the..." I knew I should get back to the district, but I was held by the inanimate, boneless bouncing of the grinning doll and struggled between the desire to join in the laughter and to leap upon it with both feet, when it suddenly collapsed and I saw the tip of the spieler's toe press upon the circular cardboard that formed the feet and a broad black hand come down, its fingers deftly lifting the doll's head and stretching it upward, twice its length, then releasing it to dance again. And suddenly the voice didn't go with the hand. It was as though I had waded out into a shallow pool only to have the bottom drop out and the water close over my head. I looked up. "Not you," I began. But his eyes looked past me deliberately unseeing. I was paralyzed, looking at him, knowing I wasn't dreaming, hearing, "What makes him a happy, what makes him dance, this Sambo, this Jambo, this high-stepping joy boy. He's more than a toy, ladies and gentlemen, he's Sambo, the dancing doll, the 20th century miracle. Look at that rumba, that Suzy Q, he's Sambo Boogie, Sambo Woogie, you don't have to feed him, he sleeps collapsed, he'll kill your depression and your dispossession, he lives upon the sunshine of your lordly smile and only 25 cents, the brotherly 2 bits of $1 because he wants me to eat. It gives him pleasure to see me eat. You simply take him and shake him. And he does the rest. Thank you, lady." It was Clifton, riding easily back and forth on his knees, flexing his legs without shifting his feet, his right shoulder raised at an angle and his arm pointing stiffly at the bouncing doll as he spieled from the corner of his mouth. The whistle came again, and I saw him glance quickly toward his lookout, the boy with the carton. "Who else wants little Sambo before we take it on the Lambo? Speak up, ladies and gentlemen, who wants little?" And again the whistle. "Who wants Sambo, the dancing, prancing? Hurry, hurry, ladies and gentlemen. There's no license for little Sambo, the joy spreader. You can't tax joy, so speak up, ladies and gentlemen." For a second our eyes met and he gave me a contemptuous smile, then he spieled again. I felt betrayed. I looked at the doll and felt my throat constrict. The rage welled behind the phlegm as I rocked back on my heels and crouched forward. There was a flash of whiteness and a splatter like heavy rain striking a newspaper and I saw the doll go over backwards, wilting into a dripping rag of frilled tissue, the hateful head upturned on its outstretched neck still grinning toward the sky. The crowd turned on me indignantly. The whistle came again. I saw a short pot-bellied man look down, then up at me with amazement and explode with laughter, pointing from me to the doll, rocking. People backed away from me. I saw Clifton step close to the building where beside the fellow with the carton I now saw a whole chorus line of dolls flouncing themselves with a perverse increase of energy and the crowd laughing hysterically. You, I began, only to see him pick up two of the dolls and step forward. But now the lookout came close. He's coming, he said, nodding toward the approaching policeman as he swept up the dolls, dropping them into the carton and starting away. Follow little Sambo around the corner, ladies and gentlemen, Clifton called. There's a great show coming up. It happened so fast that in a second only I and an old lady in a blue polka dot dress were left. She looked at me then back to the walk, smiling. I saw one of the dolls. I looked. She was still smiling and I raised my foot to crush it, hearing her cry, "Oh, no." The policeman was just opposite and I reached down instead, picking it up and walking off in the same motion. I examined it, strangely weightless in my hand, half expecting to feel it pulse with life. It was a still frill of paper. I dropped it in the pocket where I carried Brother Tarp's chain link and started after the vanished crowd. But I couldn't face Clifton again. I didn't want to see him. I might forget myself and attack him. I went in the other direction, toward 6th Avenue, past the policeman. What a way to find him, I thought. What had happened to Clifton? It was all so wrong, so unexpected. How on earth could he drop from brotherhood to this in so short a time? And why, if he had to fall back, did he try to carry the whole structure with him? What would non-members who knew him say? It was as though he had chosen, how had he put it the night he fought with Ras, to fall outside of history. I stopped in the middle of the walk with the thought. To plunge, he had said. But he knew that only in the brotherhood could we make ourselves known, could we avoid being empty Sambo dolls. Such an obscene flouncing of everything human. My God. And I had been worrying about being left out of a meeting. I'd overlook it 1,000 times, no matter why I wasn't called. I'd forget it and hold on desperately to brotherhood with all my strength. For to break away would be to plunge. To plunge. And those dolls, where had they found them? Why had he picked that way to earn a quarter? Why not sell apples or song sheets, or shine shoes? I wandered past the subway and continued around the corner to 42nd Street, my mind grappling for meaning. And when I came around the corner onto the crowded walk into the sun, they were already lining the curb and shading their faces with their hands. I saw the traffic moving with the lights, and across the street a few pedestrians were looking back toward the center of the block where the trees of Bryant Park rose above two men. I saw a flight of pigeons whirl out of the trees, and it all happened in a swift interval of their circling, very abruptly and in the noise of the traffic, yet seeming to unfold in my mind like a slow-motion movie run off with the soundtrack dead. At first I thought it was a cop and a shoeshine boy, then there was a break in the traffic and across the sun-glaring bands of trolley rails I recognized Clifton. His partner had disappeared now and Clifton had the box slung to his left shoulder with the cop moving slowly behind and to one side of him. They were coming my way, passing a newsstand, and I saw the rails in the asphalt and a fire plug at the curb and the flying birds, and thought, you'll have to follow and pay his fine. Just as the cop pushed him, jolting him forward, and Clifton trying to keep the box from swinging against his leg and saying something over his shoulder and going forward as one of the pigeons swung down into the street and up again, leaving a feather floating white in the dazzling backlight of the sun, and I could see the cop push Clifton again, stepping solidly forward in his black shirt, his arm shooting out stiffly, sending him in a head-snapping forward stumble until he caught himself, saying something over his shoulder again, the two moving in a kind of march that I'd seen many times, but never with anyone like Clifton. And I could see the cop bark a command and lunge forward, thrusting out his arm and missing, thrown off balance as suddenly Clifton spun on his toes like a dancer and swung his right arm over and around in a short, jolting arc, his torso carrying forward and to the left in a motion that sent the box strap free as his right foot traveled forward and his left arm followed through in a floating uppercut that sent the cop's cap sailing into the street and his feet flying, to drop him hard, rocking from left to right on the walk as Clifton kicked the box thudding aside and crouched, his left foot forward, his hands high, waiting. And between the flashing of cars I could see the cop propping himself on his elbows like a drunk trying to get his head up, shaking it and thrusting it forward, and somewhere between the dull roar of traffic and the subway vibrating underground I heard rapid explosions and saw each pigeon diving wildly as though blackjacked by the sound, and the cop sitting up straight now, and rising to his knees looking steadily at Clifton, and the pigeons plummeting swiftly into the trees, and Clifton still facing the cop and suddenly crumpling. He fell forward on his knees, like a man saying his prayers just as a heavy-set man in a hat with a turned-down brim stepped from around the newsstand and yelled a protest. I couldn't move. The sun seemed to scream an inch above my head. Someone shouted. A few men were starting into the street. The cop was standing now and looking down at Clifton as though surprised, the gun in his hand. I took a few steps forward, walking blindly now, unthinking, yet my mind registering it all vividly. Across and starting up on the curb, and seeing Clifton up closer now, lying in the same position, on his side, a huge wetness growing on his shirt, and I couldn't set my foot down. Cars sailed close behind me, but one couldn't take the step that would raise me up to the walk. I stood there, one leg in the street and the other raised above the curb, hearing whistles screeching and looked toward the library to see two cops coming on in a lunging, big-bellied run. I looked back to Clifton. The cop was waving me away with his gun, sounding like a boy with a changing voice. "Get back on the other side," he said. He was the cop that I'd passed on 43rd a few minutes before. My mouth was dry. "He's a friend of mine, I want to help," I said, finally stepping upon the curb. "He don't need no help, Junior. Get across that street." The cop's hair hung on the sides of his face, his uniform was dirty, and I watched him without emotion, hesitated, hearing the sound of footfalls approaching. Everything seemed slowed down. A pool formed slowly on the walk. My eyes blurred. I raised my head. The cop looked at me curiously. Above in the park I could hear the furious flapping of wings, on my neck, the pressure of eyes. I turned. A round-headed, apple-cheeked boy with a thickly freckled nose and Slavic eyes leaned over the fence of the park above, and now as he saw me turn, he shrilled something to someone behind him, his face lighting up with ecstasy. What does it mean, I wondered, turning back to that to which I did not wish to turn. There were 3 cops now, one watching the crowd and the others looking at Clifton. The first cop had his cap on again. "Look, Junior," he said very clearly, "I had enough trouble for today, you going to get on across that street?" I opened my mouth but nothing would come. Kneeling, one of the cops was examining Clifton and making notes on a pad. "I'm his friend," I said, and the one making notes looked up. "He's a cooked pigeon, Mac," he said. "You ain't got any friend anymore." I looked at him. "Hey, Mickey," the boy above us called, "the guy's out cold." I looked down. "That's right," the kneeling cop said. "What's your name?" I told him. I answered his questions about Clifton as best I could until the wagon came. For once it came quickly. I watched numbly as they moved him inside, placing the box of dolls in with him. Across the street the crowd still churned. Then the wagon was gone and I started back toward the subway. "Say, mister," the boy's voice shrilled down. "Your friend sure knows how to use his dukes." Biff, bang. 1, 2, and the cop's on his ass. I bowed my head to this final tribute, and now walking away in the sun I tried to erase the scene from my mind. I wandered down the subway stairs seeing nothing, my mind plunging. The subway was cool and I leaned against a pillar, hearing the roar of trains passing across on the other side, feeling the rushing roar of air. Why should a man deliberately plunge outside of history and peddle an obscenity? My mind went on abstractedly. Why should he choose to disarm himself, give up his voice and leave the only organization offering him a chance to define himself? The platform vibrated and I looked down. Bits of paper whirled up in the passage of air, settling quickly as a train moved past. Why had he turned away? Why had he chosen to step off the platform and fall beneath the train? Why did he choose to plunge into nothingness, into the void of faceless faces, of soundless voices, lying outside history? I tried to step away and look at it from a distance of words read in books, half remembered. For history records the patterns of men's lives, they say, who slept with whom and with what results, who fought and who won and who lived to lie about it afterwards. All things, it is said, are duly recorded, all things of importance, that is. But not quite, for actually it is only the known, the seen, the heard and only those events that the recorder regards as important that are put down, those lies his keepers keep their power by. But the cop would be Clifton's historian, his judge, his witness, and his executioner, and I was the only brother in the watching crowd. And I, the only witness for the defense, knew neither the extent of his guilt nor the nature of his crime. Where were the historians today? And how would they put it down? I stood there with the trains plunging in and out, throwing blue sparks. What did they ever think of us transitory ones? Ones such as I had been before I found brotherhood, birds of passage who were too obscure for learned classification, too silent for the most sensitive recorders of sound, of natures too ambiguous for the most ambiguous words, and too distant from the centers of historical decision to sign or even to applaud the signers of historical documents? We who write no novels, histories or other books. What about us, I thought, seeing Clifton again in my mind and going to sit upon a bench as a cool gust of air rolled up the tunnel. A body of people came down the platform, some of them Negroes. Yes, I thought, what about those of us who shoot up from the south into the busy city like wild jacks in the box broken loose from our springs, so sudden that our gait becomes like that of deep-sea divers suffering from the bends? What about those fellows waiting still and silent there on the platform, so still and silent that they clash with the crowd in their very immobility, standing noisy in their very silence, harsh as a cry of terror in their quietness? What about those three boys, coming now along the platform, tall and slender, walking stiffly with swinging shoulders in their well-pressed, too hot for summer suits, their collars high and tight about their necks, their identical hats of black cheap felt set upon the crowns of their heads with a severe formality above their hard-conked hair? It was as though I'd never seen their like before, walking slowly, their shoulders swaying, their legs swinging from their hips in trousers that ballooned upward from cuffs fitting snug about their ankles, their coats long and hip-tight with shoulders far too broad to be those of natural Western men. These fellows whose bodies seemed, what had one of my teachers said of me, "You're like one of these African sculptures, distorted in the interest of a design." Well, what design and whose? I stared as they seemed to move like dancers in some kind of funeral ceremony, swaying, going forward, their black faces secret, moving slowly down the subway platform, the heavy heel-plated shoes making a rhythmical tapping as they moved. Everyone must have seen them, or heard their muted laughter, or smelled the heavy pomade on their hair, or perhaps failed to see them at all. For they were men outside of historical time, they were untouched, they didn't believe in brotherhood, no doubt had never heard of it, or perhaps like Clifton would mysteriously have rejected its mysteries, men of transition whose faces were immobile. I got up and went behind them. Women shoppers with bundles and impatient men in straw hats and seersucker suits stood along the platform as they passed. And suddenly I found myself thinking, do they come to bury the others or to be entombed, to give life or to receive it? Do the others see them, think about them, even those standing close enough to speak? And if they spoke back, would the impatient businessmen in conventional suits and tired housewives with their plunder understand? What would they say? For the boys speak a jived-up transitional language full of country glamour, think transitional thoughts, though perhaps they dreamed the same old ancient dreams. They were men out of time, unless they found brotherhood. Men out of time, who would soon be gone and forgotten. But who knew? And now I began to tremble so violently I had to lean against a refuse can. Who knew but that they were the saviors, the true leaders, the bearers of something precious. The stewards of something uncomfortable, burdensome, which they hated because, living outside the realm of history, there was no one to applaud their value and they themselves failed to understand it. What if Brother Jack were wrong? What if history was a gambler, instead of a force in a laboratory experiment, and the boys his ace in the hole? What if history was not a reasonable citizen, but a madman full of paranoid guilan, these boys his agents, his big surprise? His own revenge? For they were outside, in the dark with Sambo, the dancing paper doll, taking it on the Lambo with my fallen brother, Todd Clifton, Todd, running and dodging the forces of history instead of making a dominating stand. A train came. I followed them and sighed. There were many seats and the three sat together. I stood, holding onto the center pole, looking down the length of the car. On one side I saw a white nun in black telling her beads, and standing before the door across the aisle there was another dressed completely in white, the exact duplicate of the other except that she was black and her black feet bare. Neither of the nuns was looking at the other but at their crucifixes, and suddenly I laughed and a verse I'd heard long ago at the Golden Day paraphrased itself in my mind: bread and wine, your cross ain't nearly so heavy as mine. And the nuns rode on with lowered heads. I looked at the boys. They sat as formally as they walked. From time to time one of them would look at his reflection in the window and give his hat brim a snap, the others watching him silently, communicating ironically with their eyes, then looking straight ahead. I staggered with the lunging of the train, feeling the overhead fans driving the hot air down upon me. What was I in relation to the boys, I wondered. Perhaps an accident, like Douglas. Perhaps each 100 years or so men like them, like me, appeared in society, drifting through, and yet by all historical logic I should have disappeared around the first part of the 19th century, rationalized out of existence. Perhaps, like them, I was a throwback, a small distant meteorite that died several hundred years ago and now lived only by virtue of the light that speeds through space at too great a pace to realize that its source has become a piece of lead. This was silly, such thoughts. I looked at the boys, one tapped another on the knee, and I saw him remove 3 rolled magazines from an inner pocket, passing 2 around and keeping one for himself. The others took theirs silently and began to read in complete absorption. One held his magazine high before his face and for an instant I saw a vivid scene: the shining rails, the fire hydrant, the fallen policeman, the diving birds and in the midground, Clifton, crumpling. Then I saw the cover of a comic book and thought, Clifton would have known them better than I. He knew them all the time. I studied them closely until they left the train, their shoulders rocking, their heavy heel plates clicking remote, cryptic messages in the brief silence of the train's stop. I came out of the subway, weak, moving through the heat as though I carried a heavy stone, the weight of a mountain on my shoulders. My new shoes hurt my feet. Now, moving through the crowds along 125th Street, I was painfully aware of other men dressed like the boys, and of girls in dark exotic colored stockings, their costumes surreal variations of downtown styles. They'd been there all along, but somehow I'd missed them. I'd missed them even when my work had been most successful. They were outside the groove of history, and it was my job to get them in, all of them. I looked into the design of their faces, hardly a one that was unlike someone I'd known down south. Forgotten names sang through my head like forgotten scenes in dreams. I moved with the crowd, the sweat pouring off me, listening to the grinding roar of traffic, the growing sound of a record shop loudspeaker blaring a languid blues. I stopped. Was this all that would be recorded? Was this the only true history of the times, a mood blared by trumpets, trombones, saxophones and drums, a song with turgid, inadequate words? My mind flowed. It was as though in this short block I was forced to walk past everyone I'd ever known and no one would smile or call my name. No one fixed me in his eyes. I walked in feverish isolation. Near the corner now a couple of boys darted out of the 5 and 10 with handfuls of candy bars, dropping them along the walks as they ran with a man right behind. They came toward me, pumping past, and I killed an impulse to trip the man and was confused all the more when an old woman standing further along threw out her leg and swung a heavy bag. The man went down, sliding across the walk as she shook her head in triumph. A pressure of guilt came over me. I stood on the edge of the walk watching the crowd threatening to attack the man until a policeman appeared and dispersed them. And although I knew no one man could do much about it, I felt responsible. All our work had been very little, no great change had been made. And it was all my fault. I'd been so fascinated by the motion that I'd forgotten to measure what it was bringing forth. I'd been asleep, dreaming. Chapter 21. When I got back to the district, a small group of youth members stopped their joking to welcome me, but I couldn't break the news. I went through to the office with only a nod, shutting the door upon their voices, and sat staring out through the trees. The once fresh green of the trees was dark and drying now, and somewhere down below a clothesline peddler clanged his bell and called. Then, as I fought against it, the scene came back, not of the death, but of the dolls. Why had I lost my head and spat upon the doll, I wondered. What had Clifton felt when he saw me? He must have hated me behind his spiel, yet he'd ignored me. Yes, and been amused by my political stupidity. I had blown up and acted personally instead of denouncing the significance of the dolls, him, the obscene idea, and seizing the opportunity to educate the crowd. We lost no opportunity to educate, and I had failed. All I'd done was to make them laugh all the louder. I had aided and abetted social backwardness. The scene changed. He lay in the sun, and this time I saw a trail of smoke left by a skywriting plane lingering in the sky. A large woman in a Kelly green dress stood near me saying, "Oh, oh." I turned and faced the map, removing the doll from my pocket and tossing it upon the desk. My stomach surged. To die for such a thing. I picked it up with an unclean feeling, looked at the frilled paper. The joined cardboard feet hung down, pulling the paper legs in elastic folds, a construction of tissue, cardboard and glue. And yet I felt a hatred as for something alive. What had made it seem to dance? Its cardboard hands were doubled into fists, the fingers outlined in orange paint, and I noticed that it had 2 faces, one on either side of the disc of cardboard, and both grinning. Clifton's voice came to me as he spieled his directions for making it dance, and I held it by the feet and stretched its neck, seeing it crumple and slide forward. I tried again, turning its other face around. It gave a tired bounce, shook itself and fell in a heap. "Go on, entertain me," I said, giving it a stretch. "You entertain the crowd." I turned it around. One face grinned as broadly as the other. It had grinned back at Clifton as it grinned forward at the crowd, and their entertainment had been his death. It had still grinned when I played the tool and spat upon it, and it was still grinning when Clifton ignored me. Then I saw a fine black thread and pulled it from the trilled paper. There was a loop tied in the end. I slipped it over my finger and stood stretching it taut. And this time it danced. Clifton had been making it dance all the time, and the black thread had been invisible. Why didn't you hit him? I asked myself. Try to break his jaw? Why didn't you hurt him and save him? You might have started a fight and both of you would have been arrested with no shooting. But why had he resisted the cop anyway? He'd been arrested before, he knew how far to go with a cop. What had the cop said to make him angry enough to lose his head? And suddenly it occurred to me that he might have been angry before he resisted, before he'd even seen the cop. My breath became short, I felt myself go weak. What if he believed I'd sold out? It was a sickening thought. I sat holding myself as though I might break. For a moment I weighed the idea, but it was too big for me. I could only accept responsibility for the living, not for the dead. My mind backed away from the notion. The incident was political. I looked at the doll, thinking, the political equivalent of such entertainment is death. But that's too broad a definition. Its economic meaning? That the life of a man is worth the sale of a 2-bit paper doll. But that didn't kill the idea that my anger helped speed him on to death. And still my mind fought against it. For what had I to do with the crisis that had broken his integrity? What had I to do with his selling the dolls in the first place? And finally I had to give that up too. I was no detective, and, politically, individuals were without meaning. The shooting was all that was left of him now. Clifton had chosen to plunge out of history and, except for the picture it made in my mind's eye, only the plunge was recorded, and that was the only important thing. I sat rigid, as though waiting to hear the explosions again, fighting against the weight that seemed to pull me down. I heard the clothesline peddler's bell. What would I tell the committee when the newspaper accounts were out? To hell with them. How would I explain the dolls? But why should I say anything? What could we do to fight back? That was my worry. The bell tolled again in the yard below. I looked at the doll. I could think of no justification for Clifton's having sold the dolls, but there was justification enough for giving him a public funeral, and I seized upon the idea now as though it would save my life. Even though I wanted to turn away from it as I wanted to turn from Clifton's crumpled body on the walk. But the odds against us were too great for such weakness. We had to use every politically effective weapon against them. Clifton understood that. He had to be buried, and I knew of no relatives. Someone had to see that he was placed in the ground. Yes, the dolls were obscene and his act a betrayal. But he was only a salesman, not the inventor, and it was necessary that we make it known that the meaning of his death was greater than the incident or the object that caused it. Both as a means of avenging him and of preventing other such deaths. Yes, and of attracting lost members back into the ranks. It would be ruthless, but a ruthlessness in the interest of brotherhood, for we had only our minds and bodies, as against the other side's vast power. We had to make the most of what we had. For they had the power to use a paper doll, first to destroy his integrity and then as an excuse for killing him. All right, so we'll use his funeral to put his integrity together again. For that's all that he had had or wanted. And now I could see the doll only vaguely, and drops of moisture were thudding down upon its absorbent paper. I was bent over, staring, when the knock came at the door and I jumped as at a shot, sweeping the doll into my pocket, and hastily wiping my eyes. "Come in," I said. The door opened slowly. A group of youth members crowded forward, their faces a question. The girls were crying. "Is it true?" they said. "That he is dead?" "Yes," I said, looking among them. "Yes. But why?" "It was a case of provocation and murder," I said, my emotions beginning to turn to anger. They stood there, their faces questioning me. "He is dead," a girl said, her voice without conviction. "Dead? But what do they mean about his selling dolls?" a tall youth said. "I don't know," I said. "I only know that he was shot down. Unarmed. I know how you feel, I saw him fall." "Take me home," a girl screamed. "Take me home." I stepped forward and caught her, a little brown thing in bobby socks, holding her against me. "No, we can't go home," I said, "none of us. We've got to fight. I'd like to get out into the air and forget it, if I ever could. What we want is not tears but anger. We must remember now that we are fighters, and in such incidents we must see the meaning of our struggle. We must strike back. I want each of you to round up all the members you can. We've got to make our reply." One of the girls was still crying piteously when they went out, but they were moving quickly. "Come on, Shirley," they said, taking the girl from my shoulder. I tried to get in touch with headquarters, but again I was unable to reach anyone. I called the Thonian, but there was no answer. So I called a committee of the district's leading members and we moved slowly ahead on our own. I tried to find the youth who was with Clifton, but he had disappeared. Members were set on the streets with cans to solicit funds for his burial. A committee of 3 old women went to the morgue to claim his body. We distributed black-bordered leaflets, denouncing the police commissioner. Preachers were notified to have their congregations send letters of protest to the mayor. The story spread. A photograph of Clifton was sent to the Negro papers and published. People were stirred and angry. Street meetings were organized. And, released, by the action, from my indecision, I threw everything I had into organizing the funeral, though moving in a kind of numb suspension. I didn't go to bed for 2 days and nights, but caught catnaps at my desk. I ate very little. The funeral was arranged to attract the largest number. Instead of holding it in a church or chapel, we selected Mount Morris Park, and an appeal went out for all former members to join the funeral march. It took place on a Saturday, in the heat of the afternoon. There was a thin overcast of clouds, and hundreds of people formed for the procession. I went around giving orders and encouragement in a feverish daze, and yet seeming to observe it all from off to one side. Brothers and sisters turned up whom I hadn't seen since my return. And members from downtown and outlying districts. I watched them with surprise as they gathered and wondered at the depths of their sorrow as the lines began to form. There were half-draped flags and black banners. There were black-bordered signs that read, "Brother Todd Clifton our hope shot down." There was a hired drum corps with crepe-draped drums. There was a band of 30 pieces. There were no cars and very few flowers. It was a slow procession and the band played sad, romantic, military marches. And when the band was silent the drum corps beat the time on drums with muffled heads. It was hot and explosive, and delivery men avoided the district and the police details were increased in number. And up and down the streets people looked out of their apartment windows and men and boys stood on the roofs in the thin veiled sun. I marched at the head with the old community leaders. It was a slow march and as I looked back from time to time I could see young Zoot Suiters, Hepcats, and men in overalls and pool hall gamblers stepping into the procession. Men came out of barber shops with lathered faces, their neckcloths hanging, to watch and comment in hushed voices. And I wondered, are they all Clifton's friends, or is it just for the spectacle, the slow-paced music? A hot wind blew from behind me, bringing the sick Swedish odor, like the smell of some female dogs in season. I looked back. The sun shone down on a mass of unbared heads, and above flags and banners and shining horns I could see the cheap grey coffin moving high upon the shoulders of Clifton's tallest companions, who from time to time shifted it smoothly onto others. They bore him high and they bore him proudly and there was an angry sadness in their eyes. The coffin floated like a heavily loaded ship in a channel, winding its way slowly above the boat and submerged heads. I could hear the steady rolling of the drums with muffled snares, and all other sounds were suspended in silence. Behind, the tramp of feet; ahead, the crowds lining the curbs for blocks. There were tears and muffled sobs and many hard, red eyes. We moved ahead. We wound through the poorest streets at first, a black image of sorrow, then turned into 7th Avenue and down and over to Lenox. Then I hurried with the leading brothers to the park in a cab. A brother in the park department had opened the lookout tower, and a crude platform of planks and rinked sawhorses had been erected beneath the black iron bell, and when the procession started into the park we were standing high above, waiting. At our signal he struck the bell, and I could feel my eardrums throbbing with the old, hollow, gut-vibrant doom-dong-doom. Looking down, I could see them winding upward in a mass to the muffled sound of the drums. Children stopped their playing on the grass to stare, and nurses at the nearby hospital came out on the roof to watch, their white uniforms glowing in the now unveiled sun like lilies. And crowds approached the park from all directions. The muffled drums now beating, now steadily rolling, spread a dead silence upon the air, a prayer toward the unknown soldier. And looking down I felt a lostness. Why were they here? Why had they found us? Because they knew Clifton? Or for the occasion his death gave them to express their protestations, a time and place to come together, to stand touching and sweating and breathing and looking in a common direction? Was either explanation adequate in itself? Did it signify love or politicalized hate? And could politics ever be an expression of love? Over the park the silence spread from the slow muffled rolling of the drums, the crunching of footsteps on the walks. Then somewhere in the procession an old, plaintive, masculine voice arose in a song, wavering, stumbling in the silence at first alone, until in the band a euphonium horn fumbled for the key and took up the air, one catching and rising above the other and the other pursuing, two black pigeons rising above a skull-white barn to tumble and rise through still, blue air. And for a few bars the pure sweet tone of the horn and the old man's husky baritone sang a duet in the hot heavy silence. There's many a thousand gone. And standing high up over the park something fought in my throat. It was a song from the past of the campus and the still earlier past of home. And now some of the older ones in the mass were joining in. I hadn't thought of it as a march before, but now they were marching to its slow-paced rhythm, up the hill. I looked for the euphonium player and saw a slender black man with his face turned toward the sun, singing through the upturned bells of the horn. And several yards behind, marching beside the young men floating the coffin upward, I looked into the face of the old man who had aroused the song and felt a twinge of envy. It was a worn, old, yellow face and his eyes were closed and I could see a knife welt around his upturned neck as his throat threw out the song. He sang with his whole body, phrasing each verse as naturally as he walked, his voice rising above all the others, blending with that of the lucid horn. I watched him now, wet-eyed, the sun hot upon my head, and I felt a wonder at the singing mass. It was as though the song had been there all the time and he knew it and aroused it, and I knew that I had known it too and had failed to release it out of a vague, nameless shame or fear. But he had known and aroused it. Even white brothers and sisters were joining in. I looked into that face, trying to plumb its secret, but it told me nothing. I looked at the coffin and the marchers, listening to them, and yet realizing that I was listening to something within myself. And for a second I heard the shattering stroke of my heart. Something deep had shaken the crowd, and the old man and the man with the horn had done it. They had touched upon something deeper than protest, or religion, though now images of all the church meetings of my life welled up within me with much suppressed and forgotten anger. But that was past, and too many of those now reaching the top of the mountain and spreading mass together had never shared it, and some had been born in other lands. And yet all were touched, the song had aroused us all. It was not the words, for they were all the same old slave-born words, it was as though he'd changed the emotion beneath the words while yet the old longing, resigned, transcendent emotion still sounded above, now deepened by that something for which the theory of brotherhood had given me no name. I stood there trying to contain it as they brought Todd Clifton's coffin into the tower and slowly up the spiral stairs. They set it down upon the platform and I looked at the shape of the cheap gray coffin and all I could remember was the sound of his name. The song had ended. Now the top of the little mountain bristled with banners, horns and uplifted faces. I could look straight down Fifth Avenue to 125th Street, where policemen were lined behind an array of hot dog wagons and good humor carts. And among the carts I saw a peanut vendor standing beneath a street lamp upon which pigeons were gathered, and now I saw him stretch out his arms with his palms turned upward, and suddenly he was covered, head, shoulders and outflung arms, with fluttering, feasting birds. Someone nudged me and I started. It was time for final words. But I had no words and I'd never been to a brotherhood funeral and had no idea of a ritual. But they were waiting. I stood there alone, there was no microphone to support me, only the coffin before me upon the backs of its wobbly carpenter's horses. I looked down into their sun-swept faces, digging for the words, and feeling a futility about it all and an anger. For this they gathered by thousands. What were they waiting to hear? Why had they come? For what reason that was different from that which had made the red-cheeked boy thrill at Clifton's falling to the earth? What did they want and what could they do? Why hadn't they come when they could have stopped it all? What are you waiting for me to tell you? I shouted suddenly, my voice strangely crisp on the windless air. What good will it do? What if I say that this isn't a funeral, That it's a holiday celebration, that if you stick around the band will end up playing Damn It the Hell the Fun's All Over? Or do you expect to see some magic, the dead rise up and walk again? Go home, he's as dead as he'll ever die. That's the end in the beginning and there's no encore. There'll be no miracles and there's no one here to preach a sermon. Go home, forget him. He's inside this box, newly dead. Go home and don't think about him. He's dead and you've got all you can do to think about you. I paused. They were whispering and looking upward. I've told you to go home, I shouted, but you keep standing there. Don't you know it's hot out here in the sun? So what if you wait for what little I can tell you? Can I say in 20 minutes what was building 21 years and ended in 20 seconds? What are you waiting for, when all I can tell you is his name? And when I tell you, what will you know that you didn't know already, except perhaps, his name? They were listening intently, and as though looking not at me, but at the pattern of my voice upon the air. All right, you do the listening in the sun and I'll try to tell you in the sun. Then you go home and forget it. Forget it. His name was Clifton and they shot him down. His name was Clifton and he was tall and some folks thought him handsome. And though he didn't believe it, I think he was. His name was Clifton and his face was black and his hair was thick with tight rolled curls, or call them naps or kinks. He's dead, uninterested, and, except to a few young girls, it doesn't matter. Have you got it? Can you see him? Think of your brother or your cousin John. His lips were thick with an upward curve at the corners. He often smiled. He had good eyes and a pair of fast hands, and he had a heart. He thought about things and he felt deeply. I won't call him noble because what's such a word to do with one of us? His name was Clifton, Todd Clifton, and, like any man, he was born of woman to live a while and fall and die. So that's his tale to the minute. His name was Clifton and for a while he lived among us and aroused a few hopes in the young manhood of man, and we who knew him loved him and he died. So why are you waiting? You've heard it all. Why wait for more, when all I can do is repeat it? They stood, they listened. They gave no sign. Very well, so I'll tell you. His name was Clifton and he was young and he was a leader and when he fell there was a hole in the heel of his sock and when he stretched forward he seemed not as tall as when he stood. So he died, and we who loved him are gathered here to mourn him. It's as simple as that and as short as that. His name was Clifton and he was black and they shot him. Isn't that enough to tell? Isn't it all you need to know? Isn't that enough to appease your thirst for drama and send you home to sleep it off? Go take a drink and forget it. Or read it in the Daily News. His name was Clifton and they shot him, and I was there to see him fall. So I know it as I know it. Here are the facts. He was standing and he fell. He fell and he kneeled. He kneeled and he bled. He bled and he died. He fell in a heap like any man and his blood spilled out like any blood, red as any blood, wet as any blood and reflecting the sky and the buildings and birds and trees, or your face if you'd looked into its stalling mirror, and it dried in the sun as blood dries. That's all. They spilled his blood and he bled. They cut him down and he died, the blood flowed on the walk in a pool, gleamed a while, and, after a while, became dull then dusty, then dried. That's the story and that's how it ended. It's an old story and there's been too much blood to excite you. Besides, it's only important when it fills the veins of a living man. Aren't you tired of such stories? Aren't you sick of the blood? Then why listen, why don't you go? It's hot out here. There's the odor of embalming fluid. The beer is cold in the taverns, the saxophones will be mellow at the Savoy, plenty good laughing lies will be told in the barber shops and beauty parlors, and there'll be sermons in 200 churches in the cool of the evening, and plenty of laughs at the movies. Go listen to Amos and Andy and forget it. Here you have only the same old story. There's not even a young wife up here in red to mourn him. There's nothing here to pity, no one to break down and shout. Nothing to give you that good old frightened feeling. The story's too short and too simple. His name was Clifton, Todd Clifton. He was unarmed and his death was as senseless as his life was futile. He had struggled for brotherhood on 100 street corners and he thought it would make him more human, but he died like any dog in a road. All right, I called out, feeling desperate. It wasn't the way I wanted it to go, it wasn't political. Brother Jack probably wouldn't approve of it at all, but I had to keep going as I could go. Listen to me standing up on this so-called mountain. I shouted. Let me tell it as it truly was. His name was Todd Clifton and he was full of illusions. He thought he was a man when he was only Todd Clifton. He was shot for a simple mistake of judgment and he bled and his blood dried and shortly the crowd trampled out the stains. It was a normal mistake of which many are guilty. He thought he was a man and that men were not meant to be pushed around. But it was hot downtown and he forgot his history, he forgot the time and the place. He lost his hold on reality. There was a cop and a waiting audience but he was Todd Clifton and cops are everywhere. The cop? What about him? He was a cop. A good citizen. But this cop had an itching finger and an eager ear for a word that rhymed with trigger, and when Clifton fell he had found it. The police special spoke its lines and the rhyme was completed. Just look around you. Look at what he made, look inside you and feel his awful power. It was perfectly natural. The blood ran like blood in a comic book killing, on a comic book street in a comic book town on a comic book day in a comic book world. Todd Clifton's one with the ages. But what's that to do with you in this heat under this veiled sun? Now he's part of history, and he has received his true freedom. Didn't they scribble his name on a standardized pad? His race, colored. Religion, unknown, probably born Baptist. Place of birth, U.S. some southern town. Next of kin, unknown. Address, unknown. Occupation, unemployed. Cause of death, be specific, resisting reality in the form of a .38 caliber revolver in the hands of the arresting officer, on 42nd between the library and the subway in the heat of the afternoon, of gunshot wounds received from 3 bullets, fired at 3 paces, 1 bullet entering the right ventricle of the heart, and lodging there, the other severing the spinal ganglia traveling downward to lodge in the pelvis, the other breaking through the back and traveling God knows where. Such was the short bitter life of brother Todd Clifton. Now he's in this box with the bolts tightened down. He's in the box and we're in there with him, and when I've told you this you can go. It's dark in this box and it's crowded. It has a cracked ceiling and a clogged up toilet in the hall. It has rats and roaches, and it's far, far too expensive a dwelling. The air is bad and it'll be cold this winter. Todd Clifton is crowded and he needs the room. Tell them to get out of the box, that's what he would say if you could hear him. Tell them to get out of the box and go teach the cops to forget that rhyme. Tell them to teach them that when they call you nigger to make a rhyme with trigger it makes the gun backfire. So there you have it. In a few hours Todd Clifton will be cold bones in the ground. And don't be fooled, for these bones shall not rise again. You and I will still be in the box. I don't know if Todd Clifton had a soul. I only know the ache that I feel in my heart, my sense of loss. I don't know if you have a soul. I only know you are men of flesh and blood, and that blood will spill and flesh grow cold. I do not know if all cops are poets, but I know that all cops carry guns with triggers. And I know too how we are labeled. So in the name of Brother Clifton, beware of the triggers, go home, keep cool, stay safe away from the sun. Forget him. When he was alive he was our hope, but why worry over a hope that's dead? So there's only one thing left to tell and I've already told it. His name was Todd Clifton, he believed in brotherhood, he aroused our hopes and he died. I couldn't go on. Below, they were waiting, hands and handkerchiefs shading their eyes. A preacher stepped up and read something out of his Bible, and I stood looking at the crowd with a sense of failure. I had let it get away from me, had been unable to bring in the political issues. And they stood there sun-beaten and sweat-bathed, listening to me repeat what was known. Now the preacher had finished, and someone signaled the bandmaster and there was solemn music as the pallbearers carried the coffin down the spiraling stairs. The crowd stood still as we walked slowly through. I could feel the bigness of it and the unknownness of it and a pent-up tension, whether of tears or anger, I couldn't tell. But as we walked through and down the hill to the hearse, I could feel it. The crowd sweated and throbbed, and though it was silent, there were many things directed toward me through its eyes. At the curb were the hearse and a few cars, and in a few minutes they were loaded and the crowd was still standing, looking on as we carried Todd Clifton away. And as I took one last look, I saw not a crowd but the set faces of individual men and women. We drove away, and when the cars stopped moving there was a grave and we placed him in it. The grave diggers sweated heavily and knew their business, and their brogue was Irish. They filled the grave quickly and we left. Todd Clifton was underground. I returned through the streets as tired as though I'd dug the grave myself alone. I felt confused and listless moving through the crowds that seemed to boil along in a kind of mist, as though the thin humid clouds had thickened and settled directly above our heads. I wanted to go somewhere, to some cool place to rest without thinking, but there was still too much to be done, plans had to be made, the crowd's emotion had to be organized. I crept along, walking a southern walk in southern weather, closing my eyes from time to time against the dazzling reds, yellows and greens of cheap sport shirts and summer dresses. The crowd boiled, sweated, heaved, women with shopping bags, men with highly polished shoes. Even down south they'd always shine their shoes. Shine shoes, shoed shines, it rang in my head. On 8th Avenue, the market carts were parked hub to hub along the curb, improvised canopies shading the withering fruits and vegetables. I could smell the stench of decaying cabbage. A watermelon huckster stood in the shade beside his truck, holding up a long slice of orange-mealed melon, crying his wares with hoarse appeals to nostalgia, memories of childhood, green shade and summer coolness. Oranges, coconuts and alligator pears lay in neat piles on little tables. I passed, winding my way through the slowly moving crowd. Stale and wilted flowers, rejected downtown, blazed feverishly on a cart, like glamorous rags festering beneath a futile spray from a punctured fruit juice can. The crowd were boiling figures seen through steaming glass from inside a washing machine, and in the streets the mounted police detail stood looking on, their eyes non-committal beneath the short polished visors of their caps, their bodies slanting forward, reins slackly alert, men and horses of flesh imitating men and horses of stone. Todd Clifton's Todd, I thought. The hucksters cried above the traffic sounds and I seemed to hear them from a distance, unsure of what they said. In a side street children with warped tricycles were parading along the walk carrying one of the signs, "Brother Todd Clifton, our hope shot down." And through the haze I again felt the tension. There was no denying it, it was there and something had to be done before it simmered away in the heat.